Boy, it's been over 60 years since I've done that. The line chief.
Yep. Expediter.
And he was the one that would look over a cleared red X no matter who cleared it.
Okay.
To see if the airplane, if he was going to release the airplane. He was the last guy to release an airplane if it had been red X'd. When I was with this thing, from here to here was a curtain.
There was a curtain, yep.
And there was two bunks here.
They used to leave the snaps in here, but they took them out now.
There was
two bunks
two bunk here. And then right here, you could put anywhere from 10 to 12 passenger type seats. They had railing down that they'd snap in.
Okay.
And we'd always carry at least 4. I'm unbuttoning an airplane right away. Well, they also had what I want to call it, bread truck is what we drove around all the time.
They gave me
I'm not quite as agile as it used to.
Yeah. They gave me a new window and it's got moisture in between it. That's why it looks foggy.
Oh, I see. Now this is new from when I was on here. There was no mirror there. We had strips on it when I had them too.
Okay.
And the reason for those originally was the vibration that the J57 put out under when it was wet was causing cracks back here.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. The strut and the truck.
The strut, we used to have a lot of trouble with leaking on.
Oh yeah.
You still have that problem?
Nope, not so much. Maybe in the winter time, if we take, if we tow it or they taxi it hard enough, a tight enough turn, it'll leak. But no, knock on wood, and no issues.
Man, we used to fight that all the time.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Are you filling these with air or nitrogen now?
Nitrogen.
Yeah.
Yep. It's got hydraulic fluid in it and the nitrogen. Yep.
Holy smokes.
About 25,000 pounds of thrust right here.
Yeah, I know.
That's tuned down.
Is that right?
We were told when we converted to these that they had to turn them down because they'd crack the wings if they were at full power. That's how much thrust they have.
Well, that's a lot quieter than what I used to.
Oh yeah. Just from the E model to the R model is so much quieter in flight. Hardly you need earplugs in anymore.
Well, at least they fill it from the same spot.
Yep. Still fill the gocks right here. Yep.
So it's actually the tail of the airplane.
Oh, neat. Thank you so much.
It doesn't have the tail number on it, but I thought you
that works fine.
So,
that works great.
Yeah, but we're so glad you had a chance and you found us.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you had a chance to come up here.
Well, I've been following. I've always kind of hung on to the 135. And I recognized the tail number because one of the pictures you showed was the tail being deliced.
Yes.
And I just said, hey, I used to work on that airplane. And I thought to myself, after I thought that for a while, I said, that's kind of neat, it's still around. And I thought for a while, I wonder if there's any chance to see, because I know there's a hell of a difference between it being an A model and what's out there right now.
And what you worked on A models, talk about the A model.
A model was what they called the water wagon. It had 4 jet engines, J57s, and when you needed to make a heavyweight takeoff, even in weather like you got right now, it had to be a wet takeoff. It had a little over 600 gallons of water, and it gave you 2 minutes of added thrust when you turned the pumps on.
Interesting. And so now you've gotten to take a look at this.
And it's got almost twice the thrust that the J-57 had with water. And the water was the idea of putting water in it, is it gave it an additional, I think it was an additional 3,000 or 4,000 pounds of thrust on the engine. And it was critical because you needed everything you get, the runway, the engine power, to get and we flew heavyweight almost all the time unless we were doing a transit mission of some sort. We did a few of those, or we were test hopping it. Everything else of that was heavyweight. We put all the basically inside of the airplane is completely different, as well as the outside initial look of the new engines on it, or the bigger engines. Now you guys almost got me to the point where I wouldn't mind taking a ride in that thing. But I don't know. It's you've got the taller tail on it. When I worked on it, it had the short tail, and we had a lot of rudder problem with that airplane when I worked on it. That thing would make you do a dance when you got it up in rough weather. It just didn't want to fly straight. And there was no autopilot on the plane when I worked on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So imagine an 8-hour flight, manual flying that sucker. Of course, it trimmed up pretty nice. If the weather or the conditions were with you, it would trim up pretty nice. And I saw him fly lots and lots of hands off, and that thing just flies straight and level like you wouldn't believe. Almost everybody who flew that airplane liked it. They didn't have anything bad to say about the characteristics of the plane, except for the way the rudder, and it gave them and it made them think twice when especially when they're bringing it down for a landing.
Yeah.
You had two choices. You could raise your hand, or they could wait till they came and raised it for you.
Right.
We were kind of car nuts back then, and we decided, hey, let's do something different. Let's see if we can find a place to work on airplanes.
Okay.
And so that's what we did. I enlisted with a buddy, with a recruiter, guaranteeing us we could be working on airplanes when we enlisted. They usually took newbies, and put them on the B-52 crews to help launch the airplanes.
Yes.
Because though they won't admit it, the B-52 could be a booger to launch.
So how did you end up on 135s?
Well, it wasn't until they brought the planes back, the first planes coming back were the 135s.
Okay.
And they needed people to help recover the planes when they landed. And so I just one day said, you're going to be out there and you're going to meet this plane on a certain hard stand. And it turned out to be a 135. It was not a 057.
Yeah.
As I was saying before, I think 057 was probably the third or fourth plane to come back from Goose Bay.
Okay.
And after recovering that plane and going through the post-flight with it and a few other things, comparing that with the pre-flight on the B-52, which no comparison whatsoever, I decided if there's any way I want to be a crew member on the 135s rather than the B-52s.
And how did you make that happen?
I just happened to mention it to
Okay.
the guy who actually turned out to be the crew chief that I worked with on the 135.
Okay.
A guy by the name of Staff Sergeant Robert McWilliams. And I said, I don't know how to do it, but I said, I'd sure like to get on it. He says, well, I can get you to work for me. And I said, okay, done. And that's how it happened.
And
The weather looked like this, but the forecast would be in 2 or 3 hours, there was going to be snow and everything else.
In northeast Maine.
And we weren't going to be able, we were going to have to go to alternate. And when we flew, our alternate was either Goose Bay, which made a lot of sense because we were up there, or we'd go all the way down to Ramey, which was in Puerto Rico, which would be nice if you're in Loring in the wintertime, go down there and get a little sunshine. But so in the wintertime, we almost always, one of the ground crew members, either the crew chief or the assistant, or sometimes both of us, would fly with the plane almost every mission that'd go on in the wintertime. Because we never knew where the plane was going to wind up when it was time to come home. And so we, and then they'd want to fly a mission out of wherever we went before we got back to Loring. And sometimes we'd get up to Goose Bay, and it'd be a week and 3 or 4 missions flown before we could get back home because of weather.
How many?
We had 2 aerial refueling squadrons initially, and we had 3 bomber squadrons, and then changed that all around, and I think they still remained with 3 bomber squadrons, and I think there was 8 to 10 planes to a squadron. And the same way with the tankers, but the tankers all wound up in 1 squadron, so we were a pretty fat squadron. The mission at Loring was a SAC base, and our mission there was to support Chrome Dome. That's all we did, was support Chrome Dome.
Okay, and what's that?
That was the airborne bombers ready to attack.
Okay.
As I said, when I was up there, it was SAC, and we worked every day as though we were at war. And that was it. The bombers were airborne for 24 hours, and the tankers supported the bombers. The bombers would have to be refueled at least once, usually twice, while they were in orbit up on the north circle, they called it. And they were all within an 8-hour penetration flight into Russia if it ever had to happen.